Welcome, everyone. It's fun to see all these new faces and faces that I remember from a while ago and from my class. I'm thrilled to be collected here tonight to celebrate my beloved former student, Kristin Fields. I should say I'm Martha Mcphee. You can see that, I guess, up there. I am the director of our Great Writers, Great Reading series, and I teach in the English department. I've been at Hofstra for many years, since 2002, I believe. This is tonight, well, I'll say Kristin was one of my early students at Hofstra and one whose talent was impossible to miss. She graduated in 2007 and we've been friends ever since. That's right, 2007, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I've watched her devote her life to a literary career, publish a first novel, A Lily in the Light, and now a second, A Frenzy of Sparks, which we're celebrating tonight. When Kristin told me that her publication date for this second novel was November 3rd, I gasped, and then I started thinking, what could we do here at Hofstra to help with the launch? My first suggestion was to move the celebration date by a couple of days. I'd been hopeful that our election would be resolved. It isn't quite, but I was sure that no matter what, an escape from political noise would be most welcome, and it sure, in fact, is. So enough about that. I suggested we at Hofstra host her book launch. It then occurred to me that it might be wonderful to create a spin-off of the Great Writers, Great Reading series, a mini-series devoted to celebrating our former students in creative writing who've gone on to publish. Everyone here at Hofstra was enthusiastic, so here we are, the inauguration of a new series with Kristin. Please be in touch if you have a book to celebrate, and to all of our former and present and future students, we can't wait for your books. But tonight is Kristin's night, and I could not be more delighted. A Frenzy of Sparks is such a carefully wrought novel filled with harrowing suspense and painful reality as the narrator Gia comes of age in the 1960s. That era replete with the miseries of Vietnam and the realities of experimentation with drugs and the horrors going too far can inflict on a person and a family, a culture really. Kristin's precise and beautiful prose transport us back in time so that we can peer through the words to a world that in some ways set the stage for our own of today. I am quite in awe of the beauty and vividness, the patience with which Kristin is able to draw her scenes and through them bring to life a long forgotten time that raises enduring questions still haunting us today: freedom, feminism, counterculture fallout, family loss, illness. Welcome back, Kristin. Welcome back to Hofstra. But before I turn the floor over to Kristin, I would also like to welcome Rachel Ekstrom Courage, Kristin's literary agent, a partner at Folio Literary Management. Just the other day, a student wrote to me to say how excited she was for tonight's event. She made a point of telling me that Ms. Courage, what a fabulous name, by the way, was her idol in the agenting world. So Rachel, you have fans here in the audience.
Whoa,
Yay.
No pressure.
Kristin and Rachel will discuss A Frenzy of Sparks, and when they finish, we will welcome questions from the audience, which I will do my best to read from the chat feature. Please place your questions there. And this will run until about 7:30, so around 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes or 15, we'll start taking questions. You just let me know. And now please help me welcome Kristin Fields and Rachel Courage.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I mean, I think back to when I was a student at Hofstra and what events like these meant for me, because it meant that it was possible, right? This dream of becoming a writer. There was somebody sitting in these chairs and they were talking about their work, and I learned so much from so many of the writers. And so thank you everybody for coming today. And Martha, thank you for organizing this. And Rachel, thank you for being here, because if not for you, I don't think I would have a writing career at this point. So very excited to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to be here too. I'm speaking with you and the Hofstra community and everyone else who's joining us. And I thought that'd be a good place to start. So Kristin, can you talk about why Hofstra and, you know, the community here a little bit and how that got you started on your writing path?
Yeah, so I was, you know, when I was graduating high school, I really wasn't sure that I wanted to go to college at all. Like I didn't know if I was that kind of kid. I didn't know if that was what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do, period. So like, why go to school and study if you're not sure? But I decided to give it a shot. We went to Hofstra. I fell in love with the grounds there, and I was like, I can picture myself here. And Barbara, who's here tonight, she was my very first English class that I ever took, first class, first day, and was so welcoming and like so encouraging of me as a writer. And it was here that I took my first creative writing class, and it was here that I wrote my first short story. And I think I was just so blown away by the support in the community that existed. So Barbara pushed me. She's like, go do writing. And then I met Martha, and I took every single class that Martha took. And by the end, I was writing, trying to write a first novel, which is in a drawer. And we'll stay there. But I don't, you know, it really did help me get my first early start. And I'm really appreciative to all the mentors and the friends that I met there, including Robin, who's here tonight and who's read everything that I've ever written, every draft. So, you know, if not for Hofstra, then I don't think I would have found writing in this way. So that's why we're here.
Now, when you're drawing from life or life experience and you're writing fiction, how do you choose what to include and what to leave out? And can you talk about that a little bit as it pertains to Frenzy or your other work as well?
Yeah, so A Frenzy of Sparks is about it's about a very young girl, and it's 1965, and she's coming of age, and she's realizing that the world is like not really open to her in the way that she would like it to be. Like she has her older brother Leo, and she sees that there's a different set of rules for guys than there is for her at the time, and she's not like super excited about her life. And so when I was thinking about like my own experiences growing up, like that's something that I drew very heavily from in crafting Gia's character. And I think that, you know, there's always a fine line. It's like you never know exactly what's going to inspire you in your writing life. And I think sometimes you might get the idea for something that's in real life, but then it takes its own entire shape on the page and deviates away from that true thing, which is kind of what happened with Frenzy and the inspiration for Frenzy too.
And that leads into the inspiration for the novel. Can you talk a little bit more about the backstory and why it's such a personal novel for you?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to write A Frenzy of Sparks, like just shortly after I'd finished A Lily in the Light, and we were launching that, and I was thinking about like what story is next. And the idea hit me for Frenzy, and I knew that I had to write it and that it wasn't going to be easy. And the idea for the story came from the fact that I have an uncle I never met because he overdosed when he was 18 years old. And it was something that was very painful for my family, and it was something that was never talked about. And I can't remember exactly how old I was when I learned of him at all. But I was probably like middle school, high school age, and to learn that there was an uncle and that he had existed, and yet we didn't talk about him. And I had so many questions. I wanted to understand. And my grandparents were from that generation of, they're like World War II vets, like what happened there stays there. Like they weren't going to talk about things that like fell in that emotional territory. And so I pieced together as much information as I could, but I wanted to understand. I think I had lived the aftermath of somebody's absence for a really long time. And when I did the math on it, I realized that like, even though it had seemed like something that happened a really long time ago, it wasn't really when you worked backwards from like, well, I was born this year and this is when it happened. And so I just wanted to understand. And so I told my father, I was like, Dad, I've got to write this story. And I was worried. I was really worried, honestly, about it. And he gave me his blessing. And I think we're a lot closer because of it, because it was the first time we ever talked about his childhood and what it was like to grow up and lose a brother. And it helped, it really helped to explore in fiction. I think it helped me understand a lot of the things that I had experienced like growing up and didn't understand at the time.
So how much is the main character Gia like you? Because if you're putting yourself in this world in the 1960s, and I mean, I try not to assume that every protagonist is a stand-in for the author, but is there any Kristin in Gia? And if she's close to you, in what ways?
Gia she's definitely the closest character that I have yet to write to myself. And, she's aware that there's differences in the world, that the world's not entirely open to her like it is to her brother. She loves nature. If she could spend every day out on the bay and studying nature and understanding the patterns, and those patterns in nature help her to understand her life. I mean, I think that was me as a kid. I grew up near a bay too, and I felt like a really close relationship to it. The smell of the tide, like you could tell when the seasons were changing based on what the water was doing. The fact that the water always reflects the color of the sky. It just felt like they had this synergy, and that if you live near it, you're going to pick up on a lot of that too. And she wants to do good in the world, but she doesn't exactly know how. And I think that was a feeling that I had when I was younger, was like watching and seeing what was expected of like women, especially in this world, and like maybe not feeling particularly excited about the options that were available. And I think, so in many ways she is like me, in many ways she's not. I mean, as she'll go swimming in the bay, I will not, like, I actually like hate swimming in water that I can't see through. I have this huge fear of like things touching my feet underwater, and like I just don't want anything to touch my skin. And so she's brave in many ways that I'm not, and I think there's definitely a line between us, even though we do have a lot of things in common.
I did not know about that in the swimming. So this is actually the third novel you've written. The second one to be published. So the first one you can see up there, A Lily in the Light, and then we have A Frenzy of Sparks. Yeah. How have you changed as a writer from that very first novel you attempted to now? And also, when can I see that first one?
Oh, yeah.
That I didn't know about. Yeah.
Well, so my first one, it's funny because it was very much like a character study. Like I was trying to understand, like, how do you make a person on the page? Like, how do you get the setting right? Like, how do you work it all together? And I think the result of it, like the writing was just differently paced. It was much slower. And that's why, like, when we met, Rachel, and you told me that A Lily in the Light actually bordered on like a thriller, I was so surprised, because like my first one was so quiet and that I didn't think that I would ever be able to like write very suspenseful scenes. But that's something that's definitely changed. And just playing around, I think I learned, I was so focused on my first book in like the elements of a story and trying to make them work together versus just working with like a really character driven thing and watching what they do on the page. And that brought out a lot of suspenseful scenes. And I can see Barbara in her Zoom screen, and she's read that first novel, and I know she's going to yell at me and tell me that it was actually very good, but she's nodding. But they have changed. Like it was definitely a quieter read compared to some of the stuff that I've done more recently, which has been fun. It's been fun to like ramp up that emotional intensity in a way that I didn't know how to do in my first one.
Oh yeah, I'm always craving that emotional intensity. So I think there's a lot of connective tissue between A Lily in the Light and The Frenzy of Sparks in terms of emotion and family. But A Frenzy of Sparks is technically historical fiction. It's set in the 60s. The first one isn't, although there's two timelines. Can you tell us about any research, how you picked this time frame, and how you researched it?
Yeah, I wanted to set it in 1965 because that's around the time that my dad was growing up, and that's around the time that we lost my uncle. And so because this was a little bit of like an exploration of family history, I wanted to go back to that time and that place. The funny thing is, I actually lived on the block where Gia lives, right? Because coincidentally, I was teaching for a little while. I was teaching high school, and I moved to be closer to that job. And it just so happened that it was in the same town that my dad had grown up in. I didn't know, but my apartment was around the block from his house that he grew up in as a kid. So just like I have been on that block, I lived next to the canal that she would have like swam in or taken her boat out from. And there were times that I would go home after work and I couldn't actually go home because the street had flooded. And so I'd have to just like turn around and go back. And so it was, but this was like years before I was ever planning to write this book, before I was ever, really starting on this journey of actually becoming a writer. And so that was part of it ended up being part of the research, but I didn't know it at the time. And then I did all, I think the most meaningful research was that I interviewed my dad and I asked him a lot of questions about his childhood and things that were meaningful to him in his childhood. We both, like having lived in that same neighborhood, have a shared appreciation for New Park Pizza, which is mentioned in the book. And it's a real pizza place. And I think it's one of my favorites in everywhere. But I had to do a lot of research on drugs. I had to do a lot of research on addiction. My sister actually helped a lot with that because she is a therapist for people who are working through addiction. And I also researched a lot of the changes in the world at the time and was kind of surprised, truthfully, that 1965 and 2020 don't necessarily look all that different as far as a lot of the issues that people are fighting to reform right now. And so those were elements that I wanted to work into the story because, of course, they would impact Gia's view of the world and Gia's view of what was possible and what was not, and what felt like it was open to her and what wasn't. And so even though it's technically historical fiction, it never really felt like historical fiction when I was writing it because I was drawing so much on the parallels that you still see today.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like you're there, and I know you weren't around in the 60s, I don't think.
No, no.
So since this is, we have a lot of writers and writing students in the crowd. As a student, you're always studying these different components of writing: the setting, the character development, narrative arc, dialogue, structure. How do you balance those elements? Are you even thinking about those elements when you're writing a novel like A Frenzy of Sparks?
So I think in my first novel, I was definitely thinking about them, and I was thinking about them as like very separate pieces. What I've learned from the first one to now is that, well, one is that setting is very important to me. I really feel like my story shouldn't take place anywhere that the characters can't live without them, right? I think the best example I can give you is if you took Game of Thrones and you tried to set it in Philadelphia, it just wouldn't be the same story, right? Like you need all those sweeping worldviews for Game of Thrones to be Game of Thrones. And so I feel like the setting has to be inherent to the character, but really that goes back to the core of writing, which is if you do nothing else, character development. It's just finding that character on page. And for me, I usually write about 200 throwaway pages. Like I've done NaNoWriMo before. It takes me about 200 pages. P.S. I handwrite them, so that's fun. And that's where I just have to find the character. I have to figure out what is motivating them, because I've never really believed in having a plot for a story. I mean, you may have an idea, something that you want to happen, but ultimately you have to understand that character enough that they're surprising you on the page with their actions and their thoughts and the things that they're saying. And that's where you have to let them write the story, almost, is the best thing I can say. And so if you worry about nothing else, it's just try to get into that character's head so that they write the story for you.
So those 200 throwaway pages, are you pulling stuff out of that, or are they purely you finding your way in and you don't use any of it?
Most of it just gets tossed, to be honest. I mean, I think I'll keep like a few things, like there'll be a couple things that I pull out, and like maybe there's 3 or 4 scenes that I really like that I feel like get to the heart of it. And then I lay them out and I write the gaps, right? So that's like how I start to, but otherwise I don't outline. I just can't. It's actually like counterproductive to me. And even though it sounds crazy, 200 pages, I know it sounds crazy. I wish there was like a more efficient way to do it, but it actually saves me so much time because I'm not trying to like impose a plot, or I'm not trying to like impose elements that I think belong there. The characters have those 200 pages to work out who they are, and then they show me where the story wants to go when I start over. It's hard, you know, I think the first time I did it, I was like, I just spent all this time, like I'm just gonna not use any, if I should save it, I'll use it somewhere else. And it doesn't work that way. It's like, can't just cut and paste from like one story and put it someplace else. It has to all belong to your intention.
I have seen one of your notebooks. I don't know if it was for Frenzy or for Lily that you showed me,
Yeah.
but maybe sometime you could show, you should post a picture of the, also the handwriting is freakishly neat, everybody. So it's really, really neat. It looks like a font. I don't know how she does it.
I actually just posted a picture on Instagram
Oh,
today of like one of the handwritten notebooks and the scene that it was like, that it ended up being in the book. So that is there, but yeah, it is a little freakishly neat. I was very obsessive about handwriting when I was like 13 years old.
Everyone go look at her Instagram after this. So Kristin, why do you write? What makes you write 200 pages that you're going to get rid of? What makes this worthwhile for you?
Well, when I think back to like being a kid, one of the things that I knew about myself like very early was that I wanted to be a writer. And I didn't know how, you know, I didn't know what that would mean or what that would look like or how I would do it. It was just a fact, and I figured that it would exist somewhere in someday, right? Like, you know, there's all your plans and then there's someday. And what I started to learn when I was at Hofstra, and the idea of like, I think Martha drilled this into my head when I was there, is like writing is rewriting, and you could take a narrative and you can rework it. And in a way, you know, your life ends up being like that too. And I find that like when I'm writing, I'm a little bit more able to like better edit in my life. What's working, what's not working, what belongs on the page, what doesn't. And I guess it's my understanding. I guess I write to understand. And you can ask my husband, he can vouch for the fact that I am much nicer when I am writing than when I am not writing. So I guess it's, I have to. But
I'm curious, when you're writing, whether you're handwriting or you're typing, are you listening to music? Like what is the like experience like? You're happier when you're writing, but like how focused are you? How long do you sit down to do it every day?
it's like, it's pretty laser focused. Like I take one distraction will break the whole chain. So normally I'm up, like if I'm in a really productive writing time, I'm up at like 4:30. I try to write for an hour or two before I start getting ready for work. I don't usually do music, but unless it's like relevant to the scene. So like when I was writing a lot of the ballet scenes for A Lily in the Light, I had whatever music I thought Esme would be listening to in the studio, or for the scenes where she's dancing to Serenade, I had that music going in the background, and that helped, you know, it like you could, in a way, those scenes follow a lot of the same emotional intensity that the music did. Even for some of the scenes in Ray's basement, I had like music going that I thought would maybe be playing in like the 60s when Gia was still down there. But otherwise, no, I like to keep the writing space like pretty quiet, because really all the noise and the action is happening on the page, which is not very exciting to anybody else in the room. But it works for me.
Well, I think that's all my questions for you right now. We could go to more questions, or we could open it up.
Well, I want to ask you some, because I know we have some publishing, like students that want to go into publishing here. So maybe you could tell them how you got into publishing, like what is it that, you asked me why I write. Why did you want to be an agent?
So my path to publishing was kind of inevitable, I guess. I was an English major. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted something to do with books. So I moved to New York City after college, and I worked in a bookstore, and I applied for publishing jobs, like any publishing job. I mainly knew about editorial assistant jobs, so that's what I applied for. And I had an interview, but I didn't get it. But they said, would you like to apply for a publicity job? We have an opening. And I said, sure. What's publicity? And I started out in publicity working on mystery novels and thrillers. And I worked my way up pretty quickly. And I love publicity. I love talking to people about books, connecting readers and books. It was a lot of fun. I was at St. Martin's and Penguin, but I didn't get to pick my projects. So I was lucky enough to work on a lot of things that I did love, but not always. And I couldn't always say, oh, I want to do this kind of book, or I want to do that kind of book. So that's why I transitioned into being an agent, which I think is very similar to being a publicist. Instead of, connecting media and an author or a book and a particular media outlet, I'm connecting editors and publishers with an author. But it is very different. It's a lot more editorial. There's still some author handholding and that kind of thing, but I get to read manuscripts like Kristin's and get excited about it. And now here we are 2 books later, and hopefully many more. So what I will say is the way I got my interview is, I applied at all the listings, but if you even have one friend or one random contact or someone from Hofstra who's in a publishing house, have them email you the internal job listings when they're posted. They post them internally before they post them publicly. Apply through HR, apply through the regular channels, but if you know anyone, also have them forward your resume. There's so many applicants for these jobs and internships. So if you have any connection at all, leverage it. And I would encourage any of you who get a job in publishing or an internship, help each other, pay it forward. Because I met a graphic designer at a concert, and she ended up forwarding me the internal listing for the job I eventually got.
Awesome.
So it had nothing to do with, my hard work, my previous internships, my, feelings on English literature, and just be persistent. And that first job might not be, the editorial job, editing the most literary novels known to man. It might be in marketing, sales, publicity, subrights.
You just said
Question. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead, Martha.
When you're done, I have a couple of questions.
You can hop in, Martha.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and stop me if I get too long-winded.
No. Well, I mean, I have one for each of you, but the student that I was talking about her name is Sabrina, and she's just really a huge fan. On my little grid, she's one below you, but anyway, her name is Sabrina Josephson.
Oh, she's right in the middle of my screen.
Yes, okay, mine too. She's smack in the middle.
I'm looking for her. Hi, Sabrina.
Sabrina's a huge fan, and if she wanted to be in touch to ask you questions, can she do that? I'm sure your contact information is easily available on the internet.
Yeah, it is, and Kristin can forward me things. I mean, I don't mean to open up your inbox, but
No,
my contact info should be on the Folio website. And if you mention Kristin or you mention Hofstra, especially in your subject line, I'm a lot more likely to see it. I get approximately a bajillion emails a day. So if I don't get back to you right away, it has nothing to do with how I feel about your email. It's just there is a lot right now, but Folio has an internship program. I'm an agent there. I'm always happy to talk to people, to do informational interviews. And then I also have a lot of colleagues. So if there's a particular kind of book you're interested in that maybe I don't do, I can always connect you with some of my fabulous colleagues.
It also might just be general about what is it like to be an agent there. Just that sort of general curiosity, which is such a wonderful thing. But back to Kristin, I love what you said about the character needing to take over. And I love that, and I tell my students that, and it's just such a weird thing, because it's like, oh really? You mean the character can just write the novel for me? Like, can I just put my feet up and have a margarita? I mean, but it's really mysterious. But my specific question is, how does that work when you are writing autobiographically? You have a narrative, you have a scenario in a world that's given to you out of your family circumstance. How do you navigate the character taking over in such a situation?
Well, and that was a challenge. You know, I had all this information like that my dad and I had talked about. There were a lot of like parts of family history that I wanted to honor in the story. But then when I sat down to actually write it, I just kept coming back to Gia, you know, and Gia wasn't like necessarily a part of like, Gia was pure fiction, or like a lot of myself projected onto her. And I almost had to know that all of these things that I had wanted to honor and that I had talked about, they were floating around in my subconscious, but I had to just develop Gia. And, you know, she surprised me. You know, I would be sitting, like, I knew, for example, I don't want to give any spoilers. This is always the hardest part. But there's one part where she's essentially like stuck on an island. And I realized like she's got no boat. And I realized she's going to swim. Like she's going to try to swim for this. And I'm sitting there and I'm writing it and I'm thinking like, don't just stay on that. Don't swim. Like, don't do, you know, and I'm like fighting in my head, but that's what she would, you know, it really does get to this point where like they are surprising you. And that's part of the joy of it for me. When we go back to that question of like, why write, is like when you can get to that point where you're just almost like channeling them, you're like a conduit. It's like, you're not really thinking about it that much anymore. That's such a like joyful part of writing for me. And I really look forward to getting to that stage when the early part of writing is always really touch and go. I think it takes a lot of time with the characters before you can get to that point. But when you do, it like changes the whole scope of the story. And so for writing students out there, don't be afraid to throw out your writing. Like, don't be afraid to do it. You have to trust that there will be more words, like you will find more. There are multiple ways to tell the story. You might realize 200 pages in that you're telling the story from the wrong character's perspective, and that is fine. Like there's no such thing as it's not like you're starting over. You're finding the story, the one that's meant to be told.
I have other questions, and I'll look over here, but please put your questions in there. Just any old question is fine, like about the process, about the novel, about blah, blah, blah. But this is, I know that there was a door prize, right?
There is a door prize. Yes.
Yeah, I think we need to talk about the door prize.
We do need to talk about that. So for all of the students here tonight, whether it's publishing or it's creative writing, we are going to do, if you want me to review your query letter or the first 3 chapters of your project or short story, you can, do we want to put that in the chat? You can drop your name in the chat and we'll random draw for you, and I will read for you and give you some feedback. So you get real life feedback, hopefully on a project that you're planning to pitch out to some agents. But we thought that would be a really fun giveaway. And I people did it for me, and it was so much fun to get that like feedback from somebody that had been through the writing ringer. So I'm very excited to see some student work.
And I would say if you don't write it in the chat and it comes to mind tomorrow, oh shoot, I'd like to do that, you can reach me, Martha Mcphee, at Hofstra. I won't tell you my address. I don't even know it. Martha.s. But if you Google Martha Mcphee Hofstra, you'll get to me. or my website, marthamcphee.com. That might be easier. And I will definitely get it to Kristin. So if it
Yes.
doesn't get in there right now, we'll do it. So, there was something more about research, and then I'm going to go over here and look at all these questions and toggle back and forth. But you were speaking so well on research and all that research that you had to do about addiction and drugs and that particular, like, if you were to research drugs and addiction today, it would be very different, I believe, than 1960. We have an epidemic now, or a pandemic, of with drug addiction, and it would look different. Also, that was a time that was much more open to experimentation, and it was in the air, and you were sort of with it if you were doing it, and it led to all sorts of stuff. So how do you do that? But how do you know when to stop?
There's a fine line. And well, I think that in the research, I have to remember it's not a research paper, right? So like you look for the things that you feel inspired by and you want to include in the story. And for me, I was very taken with the idea of, there's a historical place called Brother Island. And it was this little island, like kind of, I think off the Bronx, don't quote me exactly on where it is, but
was that anything to do with the island where the woman who made everybody sick went, what's her name?
Like Typhoid Mary or something. So I don't know about that one. I know there's a few islands like off of the city that they had sent people to for different reasons. This one specifically they used for, I guess, what we would now consider like PTSD, but also for people who had addiction issues. And it wasn't a cure. The idea was like, let's just put everybody on this island. They'll have no access to the mainland, so they won't have access to the drugs. But I think we now understand that the drugs are not necessarily the problem. Drugs are a symptom of an underlying problem, and that's what needs to be addressed. And that's not what was understood in the 60s. The idea was like, you take the thing away and that's it, it stops. But we've come a long way in that regard, but there's still quite a long way to go as far as like understanding addiction and treatment. And so, but that was, like you could go on. I watched so many.
In terms of being a writer though, and you know that I researched an enormous amount. And the question is when do you know it's enough? Like, when do you have enough? And you say you're not writing a research paper, and that's true. You don't have to. I guess if Stephen King says you just have to write enough to, you have to research enough to make it look like you know what you're talking about.
Well, you'll laugh, and it's so funny because like I wrote this whole book, right? And it's all about drug culture in the 60s in New York. I didn't mention Woodstock. Like I had this thought like a million times, like when it was way too late, that I didn't put it. Like it just didn't occur to me at the time. And it's funny because it's like that wasn't where the story was taking place. Didn't quite fit the narrative that was shaping up there, but it like felt really weird, like as in hindsight, to be like, how could I write a novel that's like set about drug addiction, 60s and drug use, and like leave Woodstock out of it?
It was a little later, but it was, and also not in Woodstock.
I know, that's right. It was in Bethel or somewhere, right?
Bethel. Okay, so let's go over here and see what we have. I just want to say that Barbara Bengal said, would you have ever believed in English 1 that you'd be doing this tonight?
No, absolutely not, Barbara. Although I think when I was a senior, I was invited to do a reading, like a few students were invited to read alongside faculty, and Barbara, you were there for that night. And that gave me like a little taste of what it could be like, and definitely whet my appetite to like do more of it. But it took, no, the answer is no. I didn't think I would be doing this tonight when I was on that day 1 in your English class.
She also adds, quiet can be good. And Jane Sarah says, should totally invent a Kristin font. And then we have Robin Gertner. To everyone, she says, have to put down kid number 2. Okay,
That's a goodbye.
but I have a question for later. Are you back, Robin? She might be. It's hard to wait for the winner of Nevada to be announced, but I imagine harder to wait when you send out the book to publishing houses. How do you survive that window of time? Is she here, or is she putting down kid number 2? I think she's putting down kid number 2. But I think everybody would like to know that, and we can fill her in later, because Robin is another beloved student who I adore, and I cannot wait for her novel to be out there and for us to be celebrating Robin. And I'll tell that to Robin when she's back from putting kid number 2 down.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a wait. You know, that wait, what is that like? And what's the relationship like with the agent, you know?
The wait is torture. I mean, like, and I don't even think, like Rachel, you said before, you get a bajillion emails a day, and I believe it, you know, and when you're a writer though, I don't think you necessarily see that side of it. You just see that you're sending this stuff out into the void and there's no answer, and you're going to doubt your ability to write. You're going to doubt, did I write the right letter? Is that the problem? Is it the book? It's me. Clearly it's me. And you're going to go through all these stages of like self-doubt and denial. And then the emails are going to come in, you'll get a response and you'll be so excited. You'll be like, this is it. And then maybe it doesn't, you know, it's a patience game. It's a waiting game. Just absolutely everybody has gone through it that's ever wanted to be a writer. I'm going to let Rachel speak to like the agent side of it too, but I think the best thing that you can do is just keep doing it. Like, you have to be persistent. You have to be patient. Like Rachel said, if you have contacts, use them, you know, because it's true. If you send a query letter to an agent and it has a person's name on it that they would recognize, that's more likely to be opened than just a cold shot in the dark. And I think the best distraction is working on your next thing, you know, just finding that little cocoon with your characters and getting lost in that world. It can really help. But Rachel, let me turn it over to you so you can answer from the agent side. Yeah.
Is it more like waiting to hear from an agent, or waiting once you have an agent to hear from a publisher? Which is the one that people want to know about, or is it both?
Maybe it's both. Maybe we should talk about both, because you know, I think like, okay, I'll speak to like when you and I met, Rachel. Like, I was so excited, and like you gave me all this direction about like edits that I needed to make to A Lily in the Light before you would like pitch it out to editors. And like, we got to talk through the game plan of like who it was maybe going to go to and where you thought it might land. And I got to speak to some of your authors that you also like represent. And so that was really exciting. And so it felt like, okay, there was like nothing happening, and now everything is happening. And then like you turn over the finished product, and then the waiting kind of starts again, right? And like it can take, there's no real rhyme or reason to how long it takes, but you know.
I want to throw in one thing that's, I think, important for especially young aspiring novel writers to hear. And there are a bunch of questions over here, so I'm going to get to those. That is rejection. You really just have to be used to rejection too. I mean, the waiting is from delivery to publication. That's one thing. You're set, you know, but it's the once you submit it to the editors and you're waiting to hear whether they like it or they. And I've been doing this for way too many years, and I still get rejected. I still need to, you know, brace myself and deal with it. And you have to have a really thick skin and realize, you know, that it's between you and you.
And the rejection doesn't stop with agents or editors either. It's like, you know, you get a 1-star review and it gets you, you know, so.
What? Who are you? I'm coming to get you. You're not supposed to do that. Do not do that.
It's funny. It's like the first time you get one, you're like, I should write to this person. I should explain that like, that wasn't intentional. Like it wasn't a flaw in the book that was intended to be that way. But like, you realize you're like, it doesn't matter. Like a lot of this is just people's opinions. And
okay, so the questions are adding up.
Let's do
and
it.
we've
Yeah.
had like 12 minutes. So I want to stop talking about rejection and start talking about T. Says, how was it connecting, researching, and creating with family members on a book? Was that it was difficult to talk about?
Yeah, and I have to say that I give my dad a ton of credit, you know. I almost thought like I had to eventually separate the two. Like there was the research side of this that was just for me. It was answering a lot of those questions about that I'd always wanted to know, but that was a lot of that was never going to ever end up in the book. But yeah, it was challenging. You know, it definitely was challenging, but at the end of the day, there was like the research side of this that was just for me personally, and then research for the story. And I think we both, like family members and myself, had to separate the two.
Barbara lets us know that North Brother Island equals Typhoid Mary. So
Okay, good.
hey,
Thank you, Barbara.
that up. So then we have Catherine Dufault, who says, it is so interesting. The process sounds very much like creating artworks. As a painter, I find that there are often paintings which are part of the process leading to the final painting. Not all paintings are the one. And the way during the creation, it sweeps the creator into another space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly, and Kath is a fantastic painter. Yeah, I think that's it. It's like you might, if you think about paintings as like a series, chapters, words, like it's all stacking up to the end product, but the journey to it is not necessarily the end product.
Cecilia Gray says, I have a question for both Kristin and Rachel. What is one thing that you wish authors knew about publishing before they begin the publishing process? How might emerging authors prepare to query agents? Send in your name for Kristin's War Prize.
Rachel, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, and it actually ties into what we were talking about before. So that's a really good question, Cecilia. I mean, we were talking about the waiting and the rejection, and honestly, that doesn't go away, and I don't think it gets easier. But one thing that I wish authors knew is that everything you see on social media or in the bookstores, you are only seeing the wins. Right. Everyone is trying to look like a big deal, and everyone is sharing all the positive news. Now there's been a little bit more transparency on Twitter where people share, you know, oh, this book didn't sell or this didn't happen for me. But we're really only seeing the curated like Instagram version. And when Kristin's talking about those 200 pages or, you know, the paintings that lead to the painting, that's the one. I see a lot from my side where there are authors that look very successful from the outside. They are very successful, but you don't hear about the project that didn't sell or the book that their editor turned down and it took them 3 tries to then get that next book sold. So just know that there's like a story behind the story. Everyone struggles. Everyone, you know, it takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of persistence. But I will say that I also want authors to know that we want your stories. We want good stories. And if something doesn't sell or doesn't get an agent, that doesn't mean it wasn't a good story. It just didn't hit right then. It didn't click with that person at that moment in time. That might mean that your next one does. And so I would hate to think that that Kristin had given up before she ever queried me a Lily in the Light, because I'm so glad I got to read that book and have those books be in the world. So I guess I want to just say persistence and know that it's not all sunshine and roses, but it isn't that for everyone either.
Yeah. So Lisa Montanaro says, am I on? Yep. I'm writing what I hope to be my debut novel. We'll be querying agents in February after my last round of revisions, loosely based on my parents' story that starts in the 1960s. This is so inspiring.
Hey.
By a frenzy of sparks. were any of your family members opposed to the project or asked to read pages to approve them? That's a great question.
That's a
Do
very
you
good question.
share that? Do you share? And I'll weigh in when you're done.
Well, I did actually. I shared the book with both of my parents first so that they could read it. But for me with this story, it's not exact to what happened. Like I took, a skeleton of the truth, and then I built a whole, characters around it that didn't exist in real life. So, if it was, I think what my dad said to me at one point, he's like, but this is a girl, like this is a 13-year-old girl. I'm like, well, I told you it wasn't like, it told you it was going to be fiction, right? And so, so I almost feel like and this is a personal decision. It's like, you never want to upset your family and friends. You never want to take advantage of like the relationships that you have with them, but you also have a commitment to what you're putting on paper and to the story and to those characters. It kind of becomes a family too. So I think it depends on the story and what you're telling, but Martha, do you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, I'll jump in because yeah, I write I pretty much write autobiographically. I mean, it's just what I do as for my novels, and so there's this translation that happens that where David Sedaris said, and that as soon as the character hits the page, as soon as the person hits the page, it becomes a character.
Yes. Yeah.
And but I have a dad who my father is a writer, and he has said all along he's a nonfiction writer. He writes for the New Yorker. Everything's completely fact-based. But he says the only mistake you make as a writer is showing it to somebody early. So if I write a novel about my family and I give it to my sisters and then they weigh in and say, oh, change this, change that. Only mistake I've made is to give it to them early. And it's true because if you're a good writer, you're not doing this to, reveal family secrets. That would be not interesting. You're doing it to create a piece of art, and you don't want anything interfering with that. And in Kristin's case, she's using her, a family story that was haunting the family, and it haunted her. And she took it and she investigated it and she got inside it. She wasn't there for it. So immediately it's fiction because it's her imagination trying to understand this, legacy. So she's going to share it, and a brother or sister it says, oh, but that's not the way it happened. That's beside the point. So I follow my dad's advice on that. The only mistake a writer makes is sharing it too early. Now you did that because you were proud of it and your parents were supportive, and that's all good. So, there are caveats to this, but you want to be able to produce the work.
And it also depends. I mean, I think I was less, this is my third novel, right? So I felt by this one, like a lot more secure in where I was going with it. And I wasn't quite looking for the feedback or the approval. It's just more to be like, here you go. Like, I want you to see what I've done.
Okay, there's a couple more questions. So I just want to get, there are 4, and I want to get to all of these. Okay. So was there ever a time you thought about giving up writing the novel? If so, what motivates you to keep writing? That's from my lovely student, Juliet.
Hi, Juliet. Yes, I think I've quit every single book I've ever started at least once. But ultimately, and that's part of the process, taking a little time away from it. But then I always came back to it because it was just something that I wanted to do and was committed to doing.
You have to have, nerves of steel, and you have to have discipline and determination, and you just keep going. So then, C. Naimbi Steele, have you ever written plays or screenplays? If yes, how is it different from writing books? If no, would you ever try to write a play? Would you like to see your book as a play or movie? And would you write the treatments with or without help?
I would love to see my books as movies. I would absolutely not want to be the person that writes them. I took one playwriting class as an undergrad, and I like getting lost in the language. I just didn't feel I had enough space to do that, and it's not for me. No, same for poetry. I wish I could, but I can't.
It's hard. I mean, some people they can write in all genres, but some people really just can't. And you're a novelist. That's what you are. I know it. I was your teacher. I know it. You're a novelist. So this is a great question from Barbara again, and she has another one that I want to end with. But did it help your dad to reveal this hidden story?
I think so. I mean, I think that it was very hard to talk about, but I feel a lot closer to my dad. I think, it's a very special thing to imagine your parents as kids, and to feel like you have an understanding of where they came from. And so I think that it certainly helped me understand him. I think that helped our relationship. And yes, I think it did help to talk about it. And one of the really beautiful things that's happened, and I think one of the reasons that I wanted to write this story, was in the 60s, and this is a big difference to how we look at addiction today versus how we looked at it in the past. In the past, it was very shameful. It was not something that was talked about. So people kept these secrets very close and didn't have the opportunity to share. But even just in the few days that this story has been out, readers have written in to share their stories of loved ones that were impacted by addiction, or even their own journeys with addiction. And that's something that I part of why I wanted to write this story was to just hold that up to the world and say, like, if you have gone through this, your family's not alone in this, and to almost create this network of comfort with talking about addiction, and to break that culture of shame that still surrounds it for some families.
So it's 7:30, but I'm going to end with one last question. But I want to first say that Lisa Montanero says, thank you so much, Kristin and Martha, for that insight. Appreciate it. And Juliet, my student, says, thank you so much. But I'm going to end with Barbara's question, which is, she says it's a typical question, but it's a great question. What are you working on now?
So I'm actually working on a new one. It's a mother-daughter con team that kind of travels around in an RV because they can't stay in one place for that long. And the daughter knows that this is not exactly right, but it's life for her. And so we start there, and then we follow her up through a couple different stages of her life to see how this con artist relationship with her mother has played out later on.
And of course, this is completely autobiographical.
100%. Yes. I once was a fortune teller and made my way across the United States. No.
I love that. I can't wait to read it. Do you have a title?
I always have a title. It's like the question I work backwards from. Whether or not it sticks is the question. But
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, will you come back with that one? Will you come back to my new series?
Yes, absolutely. Anytime you want to have me, Martha, I will be back.
Great. Everybody, thank you so much. Robin, we asked your question while you were putting number 2 down, and we have all the answers, but you have to Zoom with us privately tomorrow. Thank you all for coming. And this was just absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. Congratulations, Kristin.
Thank you.
Everybody, go buy the book. Amazon.com, A Frenzy of Sparks. It's so beautiful. My talented student. I feel so excited.
Oh, thank you, Martha.
Enjoy your publication.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe, stay well.
Everybody.